pleasure
please.
Have the opportunity to present my initial work, which will turn into my dissertation. And if we can switch up the lights, because I'm going to use the PowerPoint. So the title of my presentation is Why Don't Orphans Want to Be Tractor Drivers? Orphanage Education and Its Implications in Ukraine. Today I'd like to focus on the following issues: social problem of social orphans in Ukraine, history of child institutionalization, impoverished education in orphanages and its implications, what is in store for these children after orphanages, and finally my research agenda. 1 in every 7 Ukrainian orphans commit suicide. 1 in 5 is incarcerated. Those managing to escape this fate are susceptible to drugs, alcohol, and prostitution. Institutionalized in secluded orphanages until the age of 18, many orphans don't know how to cook, provide for themselves, or take responsibility for their actions when they exit the orphanage. Much of this is due to the lack of quality education orphans receive in their orphanages. Unequal access to quality education prevents orphans from being prepared for a self-sufficient adult life and having equal opportunities for higher education and employment. Segregated education perpetuates orphans' status quo as stigmatized children, serves as a barrier to social inclusion, and maintains culturally embedded stereotypes against these children. While international organizations such as UNICEF, Every Child, USAID have been working towards reducing institutionalization in Ukraine, which is actually twice as expensive as foster care, and it debilitates the optimal development of children, their efforts unfortunately have not extended to improving orphans' education. The alarming incidence of orphans in Ukraine has its roots in the collapse of the Soviet Union. The demise of the Soviet Union drove Ukraine into economic and social stagnation. The overnight transition from a centralized to a market economy caused rampant unemployment, pandemic poverty, high mortality rates, gender inequalities, deterioration in education, and decline in social morale. Not only did the political and economic upheaval of the 90s impoverish Soviet people and destroy their faith in the so-called bright future espoused by Soviet ideology, but it also reshaped their cultural values and undermined the social fabric. Family bonds and community cohesiveness broke down rapidly. Poverty-stricken parents had no choice but to put their children in orphanages, hoping to save them from starvation and mistreatment at home. Some disenchanted and hopeless parents turned to crime, engaging their children in criminality as accomplices, or abandoning them altogether. Increasing single parenthood and substance abuse among women in the mid-90s led to the magnitude of children abandoned in hospitals or literally thrown out with the trash. Currently, the most prevalent reason for child abandonment is parental alcohol and drug abuse. Thus, the unprecedented collapse of the welfare system and the adverse effects of the neoliberal shock therapy triggered an exponential rise of orphans, doubling their numbers up to currently estimated 100 to 120,000 children. These children remain social pariahs, facing perpetual discrimination and abuse in institutionalized orphanages. The UK NGO Every Child reports that orphanages in Eastern Europe contain very few genuine orphans. According to the Ukrainian legislature, an orphan is a child whose either one or both parents have died. However, approximately only 2 to 5% of orphans in Eastern Europe are considered full orphans, those who don't have living parents. The rest of them are social orphans. A social orphan is a child who has been abandoned by his or her parents, or has the parents whose parental rights have been taken away. The motives for taking away parental rights are numerous. Parents have been declared missing, disabled, imprisoned, detained, under investigation for not paying alimony and child support, severely sick and thus unable to attend to their child, deceased or unknown altogether. In comparison with Eastern Europe, in Ukraine, 7% of orphans are full orphans, and 93% of them are social orphans. Again, those are the children who have live-in parents. Shunned by the public, Ukrainian orphans have been institutionalized in derelict orphanages on the outskirts of cities and villages, living and studying in these segregated institutions where the only people they see on a daily basis are orphans like themselves, teachers, and staff. Now I'm going to move into the history of child institutionalization. The history of orphanages, which have existed for more than 90 years since the inception of the Soviet Union, dates back to Tsarist Russia, where child institutionalization started. However, it is worth noting that the process of institutionalization started way back in Constantinople in 335 AD. It progressed through the Middle Ages to Italy, where the first foundling homes were established to prevent child infanticide, and finally it moved into Russia, into Tsarist Russia. The first social policies addressing the needs of orphan children were adopted from the West and formulated into a decree by Tsar Fyodor Alexeyevich. His pioneering idea envisioned engaging orphans in productive labor, putting them into workhouses where basic literacy and vocational skills will be provided. Although never implemented, this policy became the legacy for Tsar Peter the Great, who built children's homes, and he strategically aimed at employing orphans as basically cheap labor for rebuilding Russia and expanding the empire's labor force. The reign of Catherine the Great was a turning point for Russia's foundling children. Establishing the first two foundling homes in Moscow and St. Petersburg, Catherine II, or Catherine the Great, and her pedagogical collaborator Ivan Vitskoy gave orphans the opportunity to be elevated from the unwanted and neglected children into a third estate or middle class of educated, patriotic, and civic-minded citizens. Providing orphans with general and moral education opened up opportunities for social integration and employment in urban areas, and allowed gifted children to pursue higher education. Imperial foundling homes could no longer operate after Bolsheviks took over in 1917. Overthrowing the Tsarist regime that had provided support and funding, as well as encouraged public engagement through foster care and donations, the new state emerged as the central bodyguard for the abandoned children. Institutionalized care burgeoned in the communist era, but really didn't solve the problem of social orphans. State control prevailed over human lives and opposed social work, which intended to rehabilitate and reunite families. As Every Child reports, the Soviet ideology envisioned children being brought up by the state because their parents were unable to raise them properly. Human Rights Watch reports in its study of Russian orphanages that the state insisted that all children meet the standard, and if children deviated from the norm, they had to be hidden away from the public eye. Among many orphans institutionalized in Soviet orphanages were children with physical disabilities, such as cerebral palsy and cleft palate, which are really not considered to be disabilities in the West and are perfectly treatable. The state blamed parents for not being able to bear a healthy child, and therefore it forced them to abandon their children in orphanages because they did not meet, quote, the perfect Soviet human being standard. Thus, this ideology embedded and perpetuated social stereotypes against orphans and legitimized the need for orphanages. A typical Soviet orphanage would contain 100 to 400 children. They would be assigned to groups by age, and they were usually taught vocational skills. After exiting the orphanage, they would pursue vocational education and then find a job in a factory.